The 1915 Armenian Genocide by Talanian, World History 2 CP, Mr. Bechtel. In the Armenian Genocide, the people involved were the Ottoman Empire, Young Turks, Germany, Austria-Hungary, and the Armenians. Turkey entered World War I on the side of Germany, and then they called themselves the Committee of Unity and Progress. This is where they set laws against Armenians to deport anyone that was a security threat. And they believed that the spiritual Armenian power and the Greek Orthodox Church was one of the threats. Thesis statement. To this day, Turks deny the 1915 Armenian Genocide, but with the awful reasons why, the dangerous conditions, and the separation of families, this was in fact a definition of a genocide. Once the Turks began calling themselves the Committee of Unity and Progress, where they set laws against Armenians, they believed that Armenians were blamed for the siding with Russians. Then Young Turks began to campaign to show Armenians are the threat to their state. This is also where Turks began to set out to eliminate number of Armenians and other Christians from eastern Anatolia in coded telegrams. This massacre began on April 24, 1914, where 300 Armenian political leaders, educators, writers, clergy in Constantinople, and many more were taken from their homes, and then briefly jailed, tortured, then hanged and shot. While this was happening, they also had death marches, where they had over 1 million Armenians covering hundreds of miles, and lasted for months. Food eventually ran out, and anyone that was left behind, stopped, or arrested were beaten until they rejoined the march, and if they couldn't continue, well, they were shot. And the practices used was that Armenians had to remove their clothing and had to march nude with the sun on them, until they dropped dead from exhaustion and dehydration. Next was the separation of families between the men and then the elderly, children, and women. During the fall and winter of 1915, 40,000 Armenian men were taken and serving in the Turkish army. Armenians' weapons were taken away, and they were put into slave labor and used as human-packed animals. These orders to eliminate Armenians were taken and written in coded telegrams. Men who were not taken into the army were tied together with ropes in small groups and then taken to the outskirts of their hometown and shot or bayoneted. The next groups were the women, children, and elderly. Children had to adopt Muslim culture and names, and they were ordered to pack few belongings in short notice and had to be ready to leave home. They thought that they were going to be brought to a non-military based zone for their own safety, when really they were being taken on a death march in Syrian desert, without food or water. Results in the survivors. Result was that 1.5 million Armenians fell in the year of 1915, and a fraction of the population escaped by fleeing to Turkey. And also, after the Russian Revolution, the Armenian survivors fled eastward. Then the masterminds of this massacre, Talat, Enver, Dejmal, and many more of Germany and Turkish descent, resigned and fled to Germany, where they were taken to an asylum. And then later, Armenian activists assassinated Young Turks who were involved in this genocide. So a conclusion of this genocide was that mainly Armenians were blamed for siding with the Russians. And then also, what happened in 1915, the Turks are still denying. And then if you still mention the Armenian genocide in Turkey today, it is known as an insult of Turkishness, and it is also a crime. But everywhere around the world, people are still mentioning that this year is the 100th anniversary of this genocide in 2015. There are going to be memorials all over many famous places in New York City, Boston, and Washington, D.C. And here's my works cited.